says I better get used to the...
Hello and welcome to At the Elephant. I'm your host, Rob Morris, and I'm very excited to have you listening. I have to say, first of all, I apologize for the episode being a day late. Appreciate your patience with that. And second, I'm very excited to bring you a very special episode. This is number 7 of the first 8. The 8th will be in 2 weeks, and then we're going to take a break. We'll come back in January with 8 more episodes that'll take us through that semester. And on this very special episode, I'm introducing a new, I don't want to say segment, but a way of doing things here at the Elephants. Here's the deal. I did interviews with lots of people for almost 45 minutes, some of them more than an hour, but what actually ends up being on the show is, a cut-down segment where they talk about one particular thing, usually, for a little while. But then I have all this extra footage. So what I've decided to do at the request of many listeners is to make those full-length recordings available to you. Now, obviously, I won't be able to give you the totally full uncut versions, but much longer. Instead of dedicating them as full episodes, what I'll do is I'll put them on the SoundCloud, not entirely uncut, but slightly cut down, at the discretion of the interviewee. And you'll be able to access those full-length segments at your leisure. In the spirit of this upcoming release, I would like to bring you the extended Robert Beseda Chronicles Part 2. I should go ahead and say I saw some excellent theater over the past few weeks on the UNCSA campus. The Learned Ladies was absolutely amazing, directed by Bob Francisconi. Quinn Gordon's Memorandum was a really, really great show. I enjoyed Alice in Slasherland, The Keys to the Kingdom performance, directed by Alex Bodine. If you are in the UNCSA area, don't miss several upcoming productions in the very, very near future. We've got Unlimited, the Stephen Schwartz review, the musical review, directed by Matt Cowart and developed by Matt Cowart and Joshua Morgan. It's amazing. It's all of your, your defying gravities, your corners of the sky and what have you, so don't miss that. The Matchmaker, directed by Carl Forsman, a play called Cock in the RJR, as well as Dying for It, directed by Timothy Douglas. And with no further ado, let's get right on to Robert Maitland Beseda. I believe we left off around here.
Oh, goodness. So how do you get from... So you're in a smaller town in Texas that refuses to be 12,000 people, and you have 2 Best Actor awards. So how do you end up at Juilliard?
Well,
was it right after high school?
No. The summer between my junior and senior year, I went to the Cherub program at Northwestern, which is like the biggest summer program.
Yeah, Greg Walter still does it.
Yeah. And that was a big, big deal for me because
Sure.
there were lots and lots of kids far more experienced. And
It's your first big pond situation, so to speak?
And we did Antigone. They did a whole bunch of different places, and I played the chorus leader. And in this production, the director of it, who was like a grad student at the University of Michigan or something, inserted for the chorus leader some sort of like monologues.
Like wrote them themselves?
No, they came from a modern adaptation.
Oh.
I think we were doing like a kiddo, this basic
Sure.
but
Stripped
he inserted some of these sort of racier or more.
He hipped it up a little bit.
Yeah. So my part was really, it was really much bigger.
Right.
And I won a Best Actor award.
Oh, nice. At the Cherubs?
Cherubs.
Wow.
And so by that time,
So that's two, and then
Yeah,
you go back
I
to
really
Texas and you
kind of
get
thought
the
this
third
is
one.
what I wanted to
Right.
do. I had known that earlier.
Well, and I also think it's interesting when people they tell stories where they do really well and they excel, and then they say, I decided or I realized that this was for me, and my brain always goes, well, it sounds like there was a much bigger, entity, whatever you want to look at it, the universe, for lack of a better term, telling you that that's something that you could put your time into because you were being rewarded, right? Not just like these accolades, but also like bigger parts and plays for you, and like that's a big community giving you a signal of like,
Oh yeah, and I got a lot of affirmation,
right, yeah,
in the community, and I even think that my peers kind of respected me for it.
Do your parents enjoy you doing all this theater stuff?
I don't know if they really enjoyed it or not. They never interfered with it, and they always allowed me. My dad had never really did what he wanted to do. I think he wanted to become a professional ball player, but in the late 40s, baseball was not that
right.
So
especially after the war, it was
just not... I don't think he ever felt like he did the thing he really wanted to do. So he always encouraged me to do what I wanted to do.
Right.
No, I never got the feeling, though I never felt like they were like, this is great, we really love what you're doing. I never had the feeling that they objected to it.
Right. They may not have been, totally crazy about the notion, but they certainly were happy that you were doing something that you enjoyed. It's interesting, isn't it, how people seem to, you never know whose parents can have a very similar story, and then they can be on either side of that, right? It can be like, oh no, please don't waste your time with that thing. You really need to be responsible and come run this appliance store with me or whatever. Versus, you know what, I don't really like running this appliance store as much as I thought, Please just go do something that you really, really enjoy.
Now, my father loved his job. My father was very gregarious, and he loved meeting people.
Right.
And I mean, he loved the whole act of selling people things they wanted and needed.
Yeah.
And interacting with them.
He was a big part of the community.
He was a big part of the community. On a Saturday in a town like Huntsville, country people come to town once a week, and that's when they
take care of business.
Yeah,
yeah.
And there were so many, for instance, black people who were illiterate, and they had accounts with my dad. They had like layaway accounts, and I can remember that when people would sign contracts with my dad, he'd write it out on an index card. They couldn't write their names,
right?
And they would make an X, and my dad would touch their hand with his finger as they made the X, and that made the contract official.
Wow.
Touching their hand while they made the X.
Was that his own thing? Or
I don't know. I think that was
kind
of, I think that may have been like an
something
old-fashioned...
people decided on at some point. They're like, we have to find a way to do this. Yeah.
I'm not sure about that, but I had a sense that this was something that was done.
So how do you get from Cherubs to Juilliard then?
I see. And so I think I came home from that, completely knowing that that's what I wanted to do. And I went and I talked to Charlie Schmidt, Dr. Charlie Schmidt, up at the drama department, and he knew I was serious about it, and he recommended that I look into Carnegie Mellon and a new school that had just opened its doors called Juilliard. And Juilliard was in New York City.
And how new was it at this point?
Brand new. I guess when my No, my senior year of high school was the first year of the Juilliard drama department.
Wow.
I was told by my high school counselor that I would not be able to get into Northwestern because they take you based on your transcripts.
And your grades weren't good enough?
My grades in like history and English and things like that are great, but my grades in math and science and all that were just C's and B minus at
Your
best.
left side classes.
Yeah, I loathed them.
Right.
I despised
These numbers out of my face.
advanced. I mean, it was, well, it just bored me. And I couldn't grasp it, and I wasn't interested.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure I flunked all those courses, and that they just let me through.
Yeah.
I think
can
that,
relate to that.
Saying, we know that Robert is a very talented and interesting person, and he just doesn't get this. And I'm sure I was, like a 55 rather than that.
I think that was
70.
The more I think about it, I think that was like the specialized education of the time. If you just couldn't grasp something, hey, just let it go.
Yeah.
He's so good in English.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I knew I couldn't get into there. I applied to only 2 colleges. It was Carnegie and Juilliard. My dad and his best friend, Phil Gibbs, who was the patriarch of the wealthiest family in town, the Gibbs family, and I flew to Pittsburgh. I remember we flew. That was very exciting. We stayed in I can't remember, it's the big old hotel in downtown Pittsburgh where Ellen Adusa died. And then I remember the following day, I guess we took a cab to the campus, and it was snow and ice all over the place. It must have been in January. There was there wasn't any like information session. There wasn't anything like I was ushered into a room that I sat around for a while, and then I went into another room and I did my pieces for like 2 men who looked very serious. And I remember I did...
Good thing you never put anyone through that.
Yeah. I remember I did Richard II, Let Us Sit Upon the Ground and Tell Sad Stories.
It was Wiley's speech in Mary's class.
And something from the play The Royal Hunt of the Sun, which was a popular historical play by Peter Schaffer. And mind you, I come from Huntsville, Texas, so right. I really did talk like this.
Right.
And then when the audition was over, and I don't remember that they even said anything to me. I remember not feeling like it was a warm experience at all. And then my dad and Phil and I walked over to the admissions building, and we sat down with must have been someone from admissions, and had like a 15-20 minute chat, and that was it. And then we had steak dinners that night at the hotel, and Phil was a first-rate alcoholic, and
professional.
Yeah, they drank a lot of bourbon, and then the following day we flew back to Houston. Now, my audition for Juilliard was in the early spring, so it must have been like March.
A couple months later.
And it was they were having auditions in Dallas, so I took the bus to Dallas by myself, and I spent the night with a family friend who was in the oil business. Huntsville was his home, but he had his offices in Dallas. And I stayed with Mr. Driscoll. He took me out to dinner at a very nice restaurant, I remember. And then the following day, the audition was at a theater, and I think it was called Stage 2. And I remember it was a kind of a black box theater, or a theater in the round kind of thing in a mall. I remember thinking it was nice. And I auditioned. I went in and I did the only person who was there was John Houseman, who was the founder of the school.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember doing my pieces for him. And he always, he was always wonderfly dressed, wonderful. Usually wore yellow shirts and like a blue tie, bow tie, and string bow tie, and he just always looked so wonderful, and he's rotund, and I finished my pieces, and he said, "How old are you?" I said, "I'm 18. He says, "How big is this town, Huntsville?" 11,999. And he said, "Well, you're good, you're talented, but you're not ready for this. You're not ready to go to New York City and study acting." He said, "Go to the University of Texas for a year. It's a very good school. Get some life experience, and if you're interested, come and audition again next year. Goodbye." I think I remember it pretty well. And so...
Much warmer than your Carnegie Mellon audition.
Yes, it was. And I left, and William Driscoll drove me to the bus station, and I took the bus home. And my dad was at the bus station waiting for me, and I got off the bus, and I said, "Dad, can you get me into the University of Texas?" And Phil Gibbs just made a phone call.
Of course.
And all of a sudden, I was admitted to the University of Texas.
So did you went to school in Austin for a year?
I went to UT for a year. And it was a great experience. It was, UT's huge, and it's such a vibrant community.
And wow, you're in Austin in '69. That could not have been
I was the year of Kent
unfun
State. We marched on the Capitol. I got tear gassed.
You got tear gassed, really?
Well, yeah. This was a big student march, and
Sure.
they tear gassed. I was in the back. I didn't get it bad. You don't want to ever get tear gassed.
No, I
My
don't.
dad was furious when I told him I'd done it, and he threatened to take my car away. And
Oh, goodness.
what's a Texan without his car? So I
Yeah.
think I lied from then on
stump.
and said that I did. And then I took Russian Lit, and I read Crime and Punishment, which was a profound experience. We had a good acting teacher. I had a good modern dance class. I had a wonderful theater history teacher where we read lots and lots of plays. We just read, that's something I wish we did more of. Is we just that year. I mean, I must have read 20, 30 plays. You had to read like 2 plays a week, and then we talk about them and occasionally write a paper. But he was really his name was Jack Wright, and it was a friend of Gerald's, but he was a very energetic man, and he made it all so interesting. But Mr. Houseman had said, if you wanted to come back.
So did you
I
contact
did.
him in January?
I went up. I went back to Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
I went back. It was at the same theater.
Oh, a little closer this time.
I flew up.
Oh,
It
nice.
was on a little puddle jumper
Sure.
airplane.
Back when they used to have the old airport in Austin.
Yeah. And this time I did Hamlet, Oh, What a Rogan Peasant Slave Am I, and Ashton from The Caretaker, the lobotomy speech at the end of Act 1. And I was a hell of a lot better
Sure.
than I was the year before. and perhaps didn't seem quite as country green.
Right.
But at this, Mr. Houseman was there, Michael Kahn was there, and Liz Smith, who was head of the voice program. I did my pieces, and then Michael asked me to do a couple of improv things, and I really can't remember. Mr. Houseman the year before never asked me to do anything.
You did your 2 pieces. He gave you his speech, and you were
That's
out.
right. And then they talked to me for a while, and it was a very nice conversation, and I remember people laughing and enjoying each other. Enjoying what I was talking about.
Right.
And then a month or so later, I got a letter saying I was accepted.
And there you went.
Yeah.
Nice. And you still did a 4-year program.
Yeah,
So
I
you
did
did 5 years of undergrad, I guess. Wow. That's good, though. I didn't know that you took the year off in between. So you were in the 3rd Juilliard class?
I'm in the 3rd graduating class.
Nice. Who else was in that class with you?
Christine Baranski, Matt Bullock.
I know him.
And most of the other people, Nicholas Survey, who was a TV star for a while. His mother was Risa Stevens, the great opera singer. I don't even know. I think he may have retired. I haven't seen his name for a while. Chris Reeves wasn't in our class. He was in group 4. No one liked to go take a shower when Chris was taking a shower.
Why is that?
Because Chris Reeves literally looked like Adonis. His
Oh, my
body
God.
was so fantastically sculpted. And this was...
It was of no shock to anyone then.
Yeah, when he became Superman?
Yeah.
None at all. But you see, kids didn't go to the gym
Right.
in the 70s. You were lean.
You're made the way you're made.
But I mean, he had been an athlete.
Got it. He's like a wrestler or some kind of...
I think he was a
Oh, that'll do it. Yeah.
Crow,
Yeah, he was on
crew,
Crew. Yeah.
and
That'll
stuff
make
like
you look
that.
like Superman for sure.
And then most of my classmates, Robert Bacciaglupi, who was one of the best actors in the class, is a lawyer for underprivileged people in New York City now. And he had been a successful actor, but he eventually moved into law, and several of at least 2, probably 3 of our classmates died from AIDS.
Oh no. It's that time though.
It was, yeah. It was that era. I lost a lot of friends to AIDS. Christine is the one who became the star.
Right.
And she was always, when we were best friends
Right.
at school, very closest friends. But she always worked harder than everybody else. She was always there before everybody else. She always, took more notes than anybody else. I mean, she was totally focused.
Laundry bag full of props to play with. Yeah, absolutely. So those are the 2, you didn't go to grad school, did you?
No.
So those were the...
I left school Michael Kahn was the artistic director of the American Shakespeare Festival in Stratford, Connecticut. And Christine, Franklin Seals, who later became something of a TV star, and he had a lead role in a movie but Franklin died of AIDS too. And the 3 of us left school before the year was over to join Stratford's company. I guess graduation was in May, and we must have left in late March or early April.
How long were you there?
For the whole season.
Oh, nice.
So the season started in May, and it went through Labor Day or maybe September.
Nice.
And I was at Stratford for 2 whole seasons.
Nice.
As part of that company.
What did you do in between those seasons?
Well, I was very lucky. Michael was the artistic director of Stratford, and he also became that summer the artistic director of the McCarter Theater. So I went and worked at the McCarter. Now my mother
Was this
died.
74?
Huh?
Is this like 73, 74?
74.
74?
Summer of 74. My mother died that summer.
Oh, no.
The summer of 74.
Suddenly?
My mom, after I went off to college and my sister went off to college and my parents had become somewhat, they weren't well off, but my mother didn't really have to work any longer.
Sure. Comfortable.
Yeah, but she was bored to death. She was a school teacher before I was born. I think she worked up until the day I was born.
Yeah. Wow.
And she took a job at the teaching elementary education at the Texas State Department of Corrections.
Gotcha.
And she loved it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think she was teaching like these grown men arithmetic,
Sure,
and how to spell, and just real basic
basic
stuff.
stuff for uneducated folks.
But, and it's not a nice story I'm about to tell you. My mother and some other teachers were taken hostage
Oh no.
by 3 inmates, it's a long story.
Sure.
And in their attempt to escape, my mother was killed.
Oh my goodness. That's
Yeah.
terrible. Terrible.
Yeah.
Wow. And so you were off working at this
I
time.
was,
And
I,
you just got a
well,
phone call and-
it was at Stratford. This was a siege. It was for 11 days. There's a lot of stuff
Oh,
about
wow.
this. Is kind of a famous thing that happened in Texas.
Wow. And this was at Huntsville.
In Huntsville.
Wow.
And it was like all over the news.
National thing for
It was
sure.
all over the papers, etc. And I went home.
Once you heard it was going on.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, and I was there when it happened, and maybe for a week or two afterwards,
Oh man.
before I went back up to Stratford.
And you're 23, 24,
Let's see.
74?
I must have been 19 when I went to Juilliard.
Right.
At 19, 20, 21, 22, 23.
Yeah. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Goodness. And your dad was still around at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Took it super hard, I'm sure.
Oh, he never recovered from it.
And how long was your pop around after that? How many years?
My father died in 2006.
Wow. I did not notice that recently.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Wow. So you're working at this other theater, and then you go back to Connecticut for the next summer. We're almost out of time. I wanted to ask you another question then before. So you did 3 auditions for college total, right? You did your 2 Juilliard auditions, and then 1 for Carnegie. I won't ask you how many you've been on the other side of the table for, because I'm sure
Thousands.
you don't know that number.
It's over 10,000.
Yeah?
I know that.
Oh wow, that's insane. So would you say that those 3 auditions shaped the way that you'd end up auditioning people at all, like your experience?
Well, it's interesting. I'd never even thought about it until this conversation.
Huh.
It must have in some way, and my own experiences auditioning as a professional actor as well,
Right, of course.
which I did a lot more than I did audition for
Of
schools.
course, of course. And as a casting,
And like I was Gerald's assistant when he was
Sure.
casting things, and Gerald is, well, he's very much a businessman in the audition room, but he creates a very friendly environment.
sure.
And I can remember how when I was sitting on that side of the table with Jerry, how much he really wanted everybody to do well.
Right.
And that was such an interest, because I think so many actors feel like the people on the other side of the table are the enemy,
Right.
and it's very infrequently so. A casting director who brings you in wants you to do well.
Right, of course.
So many times I've seen directors change their minds about what their concepts were based on what an actor brought into
Right.
the room. So more often than not, everybody's looking for each person who comes in to be the best person.
Yeah, that's what they want.
And I always wanted to create that environment in an audition room. I wanted people to come in and feel like they were really welcome there.
Well, this is wonderful. I think we should do it again because I think there's more to be had if you're interested.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to chat with you about my assorted and sordid life.
Wonderful.
I absolutely adore that man, and I'm so glad I got such a great opportunity to talk to him. We are going to have him back on the show, and I hope you all look forward to that as much as I do. That last scoring track we heard was On Father's Day by Daniel Imone, and since it is November 11th, my father's birthday, a man I respect and admire more than most people on this earth, let's go ahead and listen to the full version of On Father's Day by Daniel Imone.
Father's Day I spend forgetting everything my father ever said. Focus more on what he did. He's given me a life I only dreamt. I know you're supposed to have a gift, but forgetting was the only gift I had lying around. My father's father thinks he's lying in the ground, packing bags without a flight. I guess his boarding pass is Jesus Christ. Planning death took his whole life. Damaged as he is, his blood is mine. Though his son and I have had our fights, should my father go into the light? Then I would understand. Alright, here it is. To you that said, my man, you're not your father's kid. Don't you tell a man who he isn't, unless you're going to tell him who he is. Yeah. Whoever I've become, it's 'cause of him. So I'll imitate the sun. I'll show more good, attract more eyes, but Al, you're running out of time. You're out of time.
Well, that's it. Thank you so much for your time, for your ears, and for enjoying our show today. Check in 2 weeks. We're going to have the 8th episode for you, and I got some big stuff planned, so check it out. And my apologies to Stephen Friedrich. We ran out of time. Good night.
So I've been reading about nameless things. Don't ask me what they are. Nietzsche does.